a leaflet on your way home. Inshallah, that will be really beneficial for the masjid, inshallah. Abdul Alim is going to tell me you have to connect the phone. So you're going to live stream it on YouTube and also sorry. Let me just introduce it. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So as you can see, today is a very special talk. It is the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Islamic history, and we have a very special speaker as Brother Yakoob Ahmed. MashaAllah, he has a PhD in Islamic history, and he's going to take us on a very special journey understanding the history, Islamic history and decline of the Ottoman period. So we do not want to delay his comments, and inshallah, I'm grateful to Saqib Patel from Bilal Foundation for making it possible to bring our speaker to the Pearly Masjid. Brother Yakoob, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so first of all, thank Allah Ta'ala for elevating my status. It's not often I have opportunities to talk in front of Muslims like this. Usually I'm talking in Western academia, and one of the reasons why I accepted Brother Saqib's invitation for doing this is because he had a vision that he wanted more and more Muslims to learn about Islamic history, which is something that I am in agreement with regarding that. I think when I first started this endeavor to study Islamic history, or Ottoman history, shall I say, I still remember I was the only Muslim in the class. And that was surprising to me. When I did the PhD, so I started this process in 2007, 2008. So this is a long time ago. Since then, not much has changed. What's changed is we have a TV show which has popularized Ottoman history to some degrees. And so now there's a sentiment amongst Muslims in regards to wanting to know more about Islamic history and Ottoman history in particular. So I'm really grateful for Saqib Patel and Shaykh Suliman Gani, and may Allah Ta'ala preserve them for the work they're doing for the community, for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of my ideas, okay? Now, if I go too quickly at any point, I have a habit of doing that, just give me an indication so I may slow down. It's very difficult to teach 100 years of Ottoman history in 55 minutes. So I'm assuming there might be some information that might fly over your head. It can happen, it's not a problem. What we're going to try to do though, is I'll leave my details with the organizers, and then what you can do is if you have any specific questions, feel free to contact me so that I can help you as much as I can. Now, as I said to you before, when I started studying Islamic history, I had a concern, and the concern was that many Muslims, many young Muslims in particular, have what I would call a collective amnesia regarding the Islamic past. The problem with that is that while it's okay to understand your identity in regards to the countries you live in, but as a Muslim, you have an identity that predates this. You have an identity that is attached to people around the world. You belong to an ummah, and you have an identity that predates the ummah that lives right now to an ummah of Rasul Sallam. And then even before that, in terms of the sort of pious generations and the anbiya that came before that. As a result of that, even in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala, He reminds us of peoples and prophets about what they did in the past so that it can be relatable for you, so that you can understand what your role in this world is, right? Now, from that, we've seen many Muslims trying to replicate that, trying to make Islam relevant in the world that they live in, trying to make Islam visible and existent in the world we live in, and that's been happening for 1400 years. So we are attached to these group of people. My concern has always been that when I speak to young Muslims, their memory is absence of that. They really don't know what's going on. In the university, so for those of you that don't know, I teach in Istanbul University in the theology department. So I've migrated to Istanbul. I live there now and I teach there. And one of the things I do is I teach from the Seerah of Rasul Sallam all the way to the end of the Ottomans. So I'm teaching, as you can see, a long span. And while in Muslim countries, Muslims have a general idea of what happened in the Islamic history, whenever I come to countries like England and speak to young people, they really don't have a tight understanding of this. I will make the case, and I'll be more than confident of saying this, that even the life of Rasul Sallam itself, many of our young children don't understand that. And that's problematic for me. Because if they are facing dangers in regards to their identity, if they are facing dangers in regards to Islam, if they don't know what it means to be Muslim in a world which is changing very quickly. We have a world where there are multiple truth claims, your truth, my truth, why you're Muslim, and many of the young children are feeling confused about that. It's imperative that you don't only teach them Quran and Sunnah, but you also teach them their history so that they can attach themselves to an ummah of the past so they know what it means to belong to this block. Okay, so that's why I started this off in that sense. My specific field of expertise is Ottoman history, so that's what I'm doing in that context. So I have, 15 minutes, so I'm roughly going to try to do this in as fast as I can. Now, there's one thing that I always emphasize on in regards to Islamic history in particular, which is this is your history. This is not the history of the Turks. This is not the history of something you see on television. You're Muslim, it belongs to you. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, when I went to Turkey, that was a question that was always pointed in my direction. You don't look Turkish. Why are you doing Ottoman history? And then my reply would be, but it's Islamic history, no? And then they would say, yes, you're right. So what I'm trying to encourage you is that the first thing I'm trying to do is I want Islamic history to be put back on the curricula in both our seminaries, homeschooling, and whatever mechanisms you use for educating your children. Because that has to be a given. Our children know the names and players of football teams that they support. They can tell you the history of those teams. They can tell you the history of pop stars and anything they see on television. What they don't understand is the history of the people that they should subscribe to. And that, for me, is problematic, okay? Now, I think we need to find a way as a community, not only in this country, but everywhere we are, to try to create syllabi where we can create Islamic history that's relevant to them, that deals with their questions and their needs so that they can feel comfortable in being Muslim. So that's the first thing that I'm trying to put down here for you. This is the reason why I'm here. Because I'm a very private person. I mind my own business and generally nobody really sees me. But this is what I'm trying to encourage you. There are some young people here, which I'm really pleased about. Thank you very much for coming. It means a lot that you're here. And there are parents here who should be able to help their children trying to get this information, okay? All right. Are we okay so far? Yes? Alhamdulillah. All right, so let's start off with 1774. Okay. 1774, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to explain to you the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, what actually happens and how the Ottomans collapse. Because from this, one of the things that Muslims also have a problem with is they don't understand power, they don't understand Muslim power, they don't understand Muslims and authority, they don't understand the complexities of what happened to Muslims and what it means to be part of a multi-ethnic domain. Okay, and this here is a multi-ethnic domain. What that means is you have Albanians, you have Bosnians, you have Turks, you have Arabs, you have Kurds, you have non-Muslims and Muslims all under one roof. Okay, so what you start to see here is how Islam operated with all these different types of people living under one roof, right? So this is really important. In 1774, I wrote it in Turkish, I'm sorry about that. So in 1774, what happens is the Khanate of Crimea. What that means, the Crimea is now in Russia at the moment. So many of you would have heard about the Crimea, the conflict that's taking place in the Crimea at the moment. And the Khanate of Crimea was under Ottoman rule at the time. And in 1774, they lose it. Okay, this is the first time for the Ottomans there's a loss taking place in regards to Muslims in their domains. It never happened before. This was the first time. And the treaty is called Küçük Kaynarca because of the name of the area. Küçük means small, and Kaynarca is the name of the place. And one of the problems the Ottomans had now is, at the time, the world was, for the Ottomans, divided like this regarding Muslims. They had Muslims, so the Ummah in terms of inside the Ottoman domains and the Ummah outside of the Ottoman domains. The words were very simple. Those who are inside the Ottoman domains, we can protect them. Those who are outside the Ottoman domains, unfortunately, there's not much we can do for them. India, Africa, and so forth. They used diplomacy as a way of trying to support them, but it was very difficult, especially when the French and the British were colonizing the parts of the world. So for the Ottomans, they're now in a difficult situation. Here, what's interesting is the aggression doesn't come from the British or the French. The aggression comes from the Russians, their neighbors. And a lot of people take their eye off the Russians. They keep talking about colonialism and they forget about the Russian expansion. And the Ottomans now have a problem because they've lost the Crimea, and now they have the Muslims who used to be part of the Ottoman domains, but are no longer part of the Ottoman domains. what do we do with them? What happens now? Do we leave them alone, or do we invite them to come into the Ottoman world? If we invite them to come to Istanbul, that means we've given up on the land that they were living in. If we ask them to stay, they could go through some sort of like, genocidal process and so forth. So what do we do? You can see that for the first time, there's now a trauma in the Ottoman mind. How do we deal with this? What happens is, so we have this complexity, this interesting idea of what they call Küçük Vatan and Büyük Vatan. So Küçük Vatan means small, like nation or patriotism, and Büyük Vatan means the big land, the motherland. And so some ulama made the idea that we should migrate to Istanbul. The Russians have taken this, the Ottomans have ceded it, they've accepted the defeat to the Russians, they've signed a treaty called Küçük Kaynarca. It's over, we should migrate to Istanbul. And some said, no, this is our home. This has always been our home. Islam has been here, we're not going anywhere. So you can see the complexity in the minds of the ulama in that sense. So what the Ottomans did is they signed a treaty. For the first time in documentation, you see the word caliphate being used. Where the Ottomans saying, we are the caliphate, and so we are going to protect the people of the Crimea, and we are going to choose the mufti from Istanbul, and you still adhere to us. It's a strange setup. Why? Because it's under Russian control, but the Ottomans are still trying to have some right over the Muslims. The idea is that one day maybe they will go back. They didn't, but that was the idea. Okay, so this is the first time you start to see like now a sort of situation in the Ottoman mind. So what the Ottomans do is they decide that we need to reform the Ottoman domains. We have a situation. If we remain static and we do nothing, then the colonial powers are going to come and they're going to take our empire apart piece by piece, bit by bit. So we have to make a choice. We either do nothing or we go on the front foot. So one of the problems they had is that where the West was superior is the West, or the European powers in particular, was superior in technology. The European powers had this idea of colonialism, and so they started creating technology for trying to attain as many goods as they can for colonialism. I'll give you an example. The train. The train wasn't designed so that you and I can sit on the train and travel. The train was designed to take goods from the south of India to the north of India as quickly as possible. To take slaves from the south of India to the north of India as fast as they can. So the idea of building trains initially was designed for the colonial project. Resources and people as fast as we can. Not only that, but soldiers. The telegram, to get information from one place to another place as quick as we can. The weapons they were using, guns and so forth, they'd never been seen before. So one of the things you can see is the Ottomans have a situation, because in the Ottoman world, at that time, the main thing they were thinking about was the idea of justice. Is this government just or not just? So while they are busy in internal matters, the West are busy in external matters of expanding. Okay. Now the Ottoman domains at the time is decentralized. Doesn't fit. The Ottoman domains were decentralized. So what does that mean? What that means is you have a large domain that spans from Bosnia to the end of Turkey, to the south of Yemen, to all the way up to Egypt and Tunisia and Libya. And this is not controlled, it's one government, but it's not centralized, which means you have local leaders who are doing what they see as significant. And the Ottomans now need to centralize this domain if they want to stand any chance against the encroaching Western powers. Now, when you want to centralize, so those of you that work in an organization, and you say, you know what, there's too many people working here, we've got new machines in, we're going to streamline this, we're going to have to fire some people, we're going to have to remove some people, so there's one person in charge, people get upset. It doesn't matter if you're right, that's just how life is. So when the Ottomans decide that they need to streamline their domains, they need to make it centralized so that they can protect themselves from the foreign threat, people internally felt agitated. And so Sultan, so the next after Abdul Hamid is Salim III, he goes on a reform program of trying to, what you call, modernize his army. And the name of his army was the Nizam al-Jadid. Oh, that's Turkish, sorry. Okay. So the Nizam al-Jadid was basically, and what he decided is that the Janissary or the ex-army of the Ottoman domains, the objective of the Janissary at the time was to spread the word of Islam, expand the borders and so forth. But now it's very hard when to pay soldiers. So one of the ways that the Janissaries start to make money is that they start to own coffee shops and enterprises as a way of making money independent from going to war. So no longer is booty in the war sufficient to facilitate for the soldiers of an empire that big. It's impossible. So now the army get involved in enterprise. With the army getting involved in enterprise, this becomes problematic for the Sultan himself. How do you now control a group of people who can make money and don't need him? So now you have a bit of a situation. So one of the things that they decided is to create a new army. The interesting thing is so the Janissary like this, you write it like that, which is in Turkish, Yeniçeri. Actually, Yeni means new and Çeri means army or new order. Okay, so this is interesting because it's in Turkish, Yeniçeri. And then when they try to replace the Yeniçeri with the Nizam al-Jadid, it means the same thing, but in Arabic. So what we're starting to see, which is interesting at this time as well, is that the influx or the Islamization to a certain degree of the Ottoman domains, where more and more Arabic and Ottoman and Persian forms are becoming a lot more fused. Selim tries to replace them. It's difficult for him to replace them. So what they do is the Janissaries, they kill the Sultan. Okay, so yeah, a lot of people get surprised when they hear that. The Janissaries killed the Sultan. This is one of the interesting things, which is that it was basically the internal military was unwilling to allow a military reformation to take place, where they knew that all the authority would go in the hands of the Sultan, and they would lose out in terms of what they are doing in terms of their objectives, and so they decided to remove the Sultan instead. And so now you have blood in the hands of the Janissaries, and this is not uncommon in the Ottoman domains. So the next person we have now in power, after Selim is killed, is interesting. It's Mahmud II. And Mahmud has seen what's happened to Selim, and he's saying this is not going to happen to me. So what Mahmud does is he gradually decides to remove any obstacles in his way to centralize the Ottoman domains. So first what he does is he crushes Ali Pasha in Greece. Ali Pasha was an Albanian governor of Greece who was very powerful, who was very supportive of Istanbul, but he was problematic. He wasn't stepping down. And so Mahmud decides, you know what, I need to take him out. And he sends in the armies and he takes him out. So you can start to see in the Balkan provinces, so if I was to draw a map for you like this, this is the Balkans, this is Turkey, this is the Arab provinces. They're now trying to centralize the Balkan provinces. The Balkans was probably the most important provinces for the Ottomans because the Balkans was the Ottoman project. Muslims had become Muslims in the Arab world and in Turkey, we call Turkey today, or Anatolia, prior to the Ottomans. The Ottomans brought Islam to Europe, to the Balkans, the Bosnians, the Albanians, all of these type of people, that groups, sorry, not people, but all these groups that exist, ethnic groups, this because of the Ottomans. Okay, so the Balkans was an Ottoman project. The Balkans could not be lost by the Ottomans in that sense. So they centralized the Ottomans first. The Balkans first. Then the next thing they do is they start to remove any other governors who are problematic, and they take them out one by one, trying to centralize the Ottoman domains. Finally, in 1826, they massacre the Janissaries. In Istanbul, they decide that the Janissaries are not leaving. We need to reform the army. If we don't reform the army now, there's going to be a problem, and we're going to have to do something. So an internal conflict takes place where the Ottomans finally take out the Janissaries in full. And this was a really traumatic period in the Ottoman world, to see this internal contestation, Muslim contestation for power taking place within the Ottoman domains. Now, what you need to understand is that this is nothing new to Islamic history. This is one of the things that shocks many young people, because when they study Islamic history, they think our history is perfect. It's not. We've done many things that they should know and they ought to know so that they can place themselves in the world that they live in that context. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the Janissaries get wiped out in 1826. And as a result of that, what we see in Egypt is a response by Mehmed Ali Pasha. Mehmed Ali Pasha was an Albanian governor of Egypt. Okay, and Mehmed Ali Pasha had centralized and reformed Egypt as soon as Napoleon had left. So one of the interesting things about Egypt now is that Egypt became very powerful even though it was part of the Ottoman domains, but this governor became very powerful. And Mahmud II now needed to do something about Mehmed Ali Pasha. How do I get this person to submit to me? Mehmed Ali Pasha was not going to submit to him. No way, no chance. Reason being, he said, I've seen what you've done to everyone else. Do you think I'm going to go down that direction? So what Mehmed Ali Pasha decides is he's going to take his army and march them to Istanbul and tell the Sultan to stop. Says, fine, you want to centralize, I get it. You want to be in power, I get it, but you're not going to do this to me. And so the Sultan said, what do you want? He says, I want autonomy. Leave me alone. I'll be okay in Egypt. I'll listen to you. I'll send you men, but you got to leave me alone in Egypt. Sultan goes, no way, no chance. I don't trust you. It's not going to happen. And so now the two most powerful armies in the Ottoman domains go to war. And this is very problematic. Mehmed Ali Pasha takes his armies gradually north. First makes it to Damascus, then to Aleppo, nobody stops him. Makes it to Konya, nobody stops him. He then gets to Kütahya and he waits because it starts to snow. And he sends a telegram to the Sultan. He says, listen, stop. If you don't stop, my armies are stronger than yours. I'm going to take you out. The Sultan, on the other hand, thinks, no way, I've got a new army and my new army will crush him. But what's interesting is in the past, when it was decentralized, this is interesting, when it was decentralized and you had local leaders, those local leaders could have stopped Mehmed Ali Pasha. The Janissaries might have been able to stop Mehmed Ali Pasha, but the Sultan wiped them all out. This is one of the things you start to learn when you look at history in particular, is that when one person takes too much control and there are checks and balances, it's very easy to take that one person out. So what we're seeing now is the complication between a centralized domain and a decentralized domain. The advantages of decentralization is that there are many people in positions of power. The authority doesn't stop on one person's head, and so the domains, the authority can be shared. The problem with that is that when you want to do something quick and fast, people don't listen. So if you have, let's just say, a business model, and you have one person in charge and many managers, and they're quite powerful, and they're powerful characters, and you tell them, this is what I want to implement, this is what I want to do, and half of them say, no, we're not interested. It's very hard to convince them to do that. So that's the disadvantage of decentralization. All right, the advantage of centralization is, let's just say you take them all away. Say, I'm in charge, I'm going to make all the decisions. But what if you're making the wrong decisions? What do you do now? Right? So there are advantages, but the disadvantages, if you're making mistakes, then everyone is going with you. And so where are the checks and balances on this? So this is what we're starting to see, that the Ottomans want to centralize. And what's interesting is the forces that could have stopped Mehmed Ali Pasha, they don't exist anymore. They can't stop him. Fortunately, in the Ottoman domains in 1838, or should we say 39, Mahmud II dies. Now, we don't really know how he dies, but he dies. Okay, and in comes in power his son, Abdul Majid I. Okay, and this period is known as the Tanzimat period, which means the Reformation period. Okay, Mahmud had to some degree succeeded in centralizing the domains. When Abdul Majid I comes to power, he's only 18 years old. And one of the things that Istanbul decides is that they tell Mehmed Ali Pasha, okay, take it easy, time out. Why are we fighting each other? Because one of the problems that Mahmud had done is he invited the Russians and the French to stop Mehmed Ali Pasha. He thought, I can't stop him, so now I'm going to have to ask foreign powers to come in to help me stop him. And if they can just stop him, then I'll be in charge, and then I could just tell them to get lost. That never happens. It never happens with foreign powers. Once the foreign powers come to your land, they're staying. Okay? So people were warning Mahmud that this is not going to work. Don't do this. This is an internal fight. This is an internal struggle. Don't do this. But Mahmud didn't listen. And so when Mahmud dies, Abdul Majid I, he decides to write a document with the ulama and the Grand Vizier called the Gulhane Edict. And in it, they say, okay, enough, stop. No more fighting. We need to pull this together because it's the empire is to the detriment here. Okay? Mehmed Ali Pasha goes, fine, I will retreat, but in return, I want Syria, I want Egypt, and I want my own army. The Ottomans say, no, you can't have that. You can have Egypt and you have your own army. Because I'll have my own army, but I want a lineage. Don't attack my lineage. And his lineage goes up to all the way in Egyptian history, up until when you have the revolution by Nasser in the Egyptian context. So you can see that the lineage stays for quite a long time, right? So now the Tanzimat period is interesting because now that the Ottoman domains is open to centralization, we start to see what we would call reformation. It becomes a bureaucratic state. The bureaucrats come into power. Abdul Majid is still very young. He's 18 years old as a sultan. And so the authority goes into the hands of the Grand Vizier. Okay, so I know it's a lot of information. I'm really sorry. For me, I'm a geek, so it happens. Sorry about it. But you know, to some degree, I'm not going to lie. I wanted to blast you with the information. So when you go home, you feel like you don't know anything. So that then you start picking up the books. Okay, so this is a tactic of mine I'm using as well. So,
the pace is fine.
yeah, it's fine. Okay, thanks. Because seriously, I really want you guys to read. I want you to read. I want you to know. You know. You have a question? Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
What's the difference between the Janissary army and the other one?
Okay, so the Janissary army was the old army. It was the pre-existing army that came about. I mean, it comes in early Ottoman history, but from the time of Fatih Sultan Mehmed, he sort of institutionalizes this new army, which makes the Ottomans very successful. And what they do is when they go into the Balkans, they take these children, turn them into soldiers, almost like, you know, today's when you have to go into military service, and they become this elite unit. But by this time, the elite unit is not elite anymore. There needs to be some form of reformation. So they create a new army in the hope that the old army can just phase out, but the old army knew what was happening. So this is why there's a contestation, okay? All right, so in the Tanzimat period, what we start to see is military reform, educational reform, and mainly economic reform, all right? What's interesting is you reform the military in the Ottoman world, you reform everything. In some ways, it was the main institution. You still see that in many Muslim countries, that the military is still the main institution in regards to authority. Prime ministers can come and go, presidents can come and go, but the military always remains. Okay, and you have to understand that in terms of how I'm trying to teach you this history, so that when you go to Muslim countries, you have to understand even the politics of today. It hasn't escaped this culture, that the institution of the military. So what the Ottomans did is they said, if we reform the military, then what they did is that naturally reform the education, the economic, and the law. Okay, now we start to see a situation. In terms of the education, they had the madrasa system. Now, here was the problem with the madrasa system. The madrasa system was very efficient for the Ottomans, but now the world is changing. They need new types of education. They need translation, they need technocrats, they need people who understand machinery and so forth. And the madrasa was unable to cope with that. So the Ottomans had to make a choice. We either trash the madrasa and create a new education, we keep the madrasa and we reform the madrasa, or we have two educational systems side by side. Now, they didn't trash the madrasa because they couldn't do that. So, and they couldn't reform the madrasa because too many of the ulama would complain. What are you doing? Don't touch the madrasa, you don't know what you're doing. So they said, let's have a parallel system next to it. We teach ulum ad-din in the madrasa, and we'll have the new education in the new civil schools. Okay. Now, the problem with that was that for the first time you're starting to see that whereas Islam was teaching everything, now Islam became specialized. Okay, in that sense, now the madrasa was only the place for people to be ulama. Whereas in the past, if you see historians, philosophers, thinkers, doctors, all of them were coming out of the madrasa system. Now that wasn't happening. The reason being is because the world was turning to speed so fast. They had to make a choice. Now, what's amazing though, is that these new schools, where do you get the teachers from? You have to go to the madrasa. Because they're not going to come out of the sky. You can't go to England. So you're still, in some ways, passing them through in this sense. So there is still a connection. But now you're seeing two clear. Oh, okay, that's it. Don't worry about it, it's cool. No, it's fine. So what you start to see is this new educational system. Now, this is really important because in Muslim societies, one of the questions that they ask is, what happened with the education? This is a question that still exists in Muslim societies today. In regards to the education that our children are getting, what is the most efficient way to give them an education that's Islamically compliant, but also compliant in the needs that are taking place in the world today? We start to see this in the beginning of the Ottoman period. But there's a lot we can learn from this in terms of the challenges and choices they had to make in this context. The law, they start to have more civil law courts. Okay, so one of the interesting things is we call it the Majalla. The Majalla was a book on civil matters, mainly to do with transactions. And what the ulama decided is that we were going to put law into a book, right? In the past, the ulama would have to memorize hadith. The qadi was in charge, and we call it, like qadi justice. You come and the qadi passes something through, and that's. But the Ottomans said, okay, look, in these civil matters, it's too complicated to have too many of these judges. The process is very slow. The empire is expanding big. We can just put regular scholars in these courts, and we'll just give them Majalla, which is what? You just take out a book, open it, page 54, close it, put it back. That's the law, right? Print press. The print press changed something. The print press is really fascinating because today we take for granted the print press. I give an example, the Mus'haf. In this period, the Mus'haf was written by hand. There was no printed version of the Mus'haf. So the only people that had Mus'hafs were people who were rich or people who were students of knowledge, right? Apart from that, you don't have Mus'haf. So what happens? People are memorizing Quran. That's one. Many people are memorizing Quran because they don't have a Mus'haf. The second thing is, when you go into a mosque in Turkey, you'll see the calligraphy on the walls. That's not just for decoration. Those are specific verses for specific reasons. When people go and see a verse, they read that verse of the Quran, that's their interaction with Quran. Number 3, when they go into a mosque, the Imam is reciting Quran. They all used to go to the mosque to listen to it. There's no tapes in those days. There's no CD player. There's no internet. You have to listen to somebody physically. Now, when print presses come in, what's going on? Those people that are writing Quran, they're losing their jobs. And they say, what are you doing? Stop. Like, we get barakah from this. This is our job. It's like telling the muezzin today, we don't need you. We can just play a tape. It sounds bizarre for us today, but that's what was happening in this period. So understand how technology, which we take for granted, there were huge conversations. Another example, the clock. The clock not only changed the way we saw the time, we told the time, the clock changed our perception of time. In the past, people would say, I'll meet you after Salat al-Maghrib. After Salat al-Maghrib, no problem. Now the clock was saying, I'll meet you at 4:57. Be there on time. Okay? And the clock came because of the Industrial Revolution, where you start work at 9, you finish at 5. Everybody in line, get to work, busy. In the Muslim world, you guarantee Muslims are always late. Yes, even here, move around. So what Sultan Abdul Hamid wanted to do, we'll talk about this later, is he wanted to instill the notion of time. Stick to time. But like I said, that idea of time started to change the way we saw ourselves in the world we live in. So these sound like really small technological introductions, but actually these small technological introductions were huge for the way that they were changing society. Okay, they were changing society rapidly. And this all happens in the reform period of the Tanzimat. Now, as I told you before, where did I put that? Oh, sorry. What the Tanzimat period did is it took the authority away from the Sultan and into the hand of the Sublime Porte, which is the office of the Grand Vizier. The Sublime Porte was basically the idea that the Sultan would delegate, like a chief minister, to do most of the work, while he was busy with other activities, because that's how it operated, right? And in this period, unfortunately, the authority, because the Sultan was very young, went into the hands of the Sublime Porte, into the office of the Grand Vizier. And the Grand Vizier's reform package was happening so quickly that it became very problematic for the Sultan to get authority back. And so some people feel that the office of the Sultan, which was also the office of the Caliphate, was starting to become weaker. So now, in 1876, so after Abdul Majid, we have Abdul Aziz, but I don't have time to explain about him. Unfortunately, so Abdul Aziz Majid dies of TB, very young. Abdulaziz comes to power, and he's trying to now get the authority back into the hands of the Sultan, away from the Sublime Porte. Okay, but there's a contestation, and Abdulaziz is murdered. Now, the traditional historiography said that he committed suicide, but us modern academics are saying it's not possible. One of the reasons why it's not possible because he slit both of his wrists. Impossible. You slit one wrist, you can ask any doctor, you can't hold a knife to slit the other wrist because it's done, right? So the chances are is that he was executed. The reason why he was executed because when he was in charge, he was spending a lot of money and they couldn't control him and they couldn't get him to stop. So this raises the question in terms of when somebody's in absolute power, what systems and mechanisms do you have in place to stop that? Now, once again, you've got to understand, people might find that strange, but this is going through a transformation, okay? We'll start to see in the Hamidian period how this sort of activity stops, okay? And then the Sultan gets arrested instead. So 1876, we have Abdul Hamid II, okay? And Abdul Hamid II is known as the Pious Sultan. Abdul Hamid comes into power, and one of the first things that Abdul Hamid decides to do is that he wants to move authority away from the Sublime Porte into the hands of the Sultanate and create a strong caliphate system. His belief is that by having a strong caliphate ideology, what happens is the Muslims would be adherent to the Sultan himself. He becomes the charismatic leader. And this is very interesting. We're now starting to see in Islamic history the idea of a charismatic leader. For some reason, Muslims, they subscribe to the charismatic leader. Okay, it's very interesting. That doesn't happen in the West. The West are not interested in that. But Muslims are interested in their leader to be upright, to be religious, and to be charismatic. This is why I guess, and I'm assuming that many people like watching Dirilish Ertuğrul. It's irrelevant if Dirilish Ertuğrul is true or not. What's relevant to them is that when they see his character, he represents somebody who's upright, who's loyal, who's brave, who's charismatic. And when we are studying Islamic history, that's how we look at the Sahaba, that's how we look at our great leadership, we look at it in this shape. And so this is what's happening to Abdul Hamid II. Well, let me write his name here. The idea is now the new Sultan, they're going to construct the image okay, they're going to construct the image of the new Sultan as the Pious Sultan. Okay, and Abdul Hamid did a lot, in fairness. One of the interesting things that Abdul Hamid did, which is different from the British actually, is he built the Hijaz railway station. The reason why he built the Hijaz railway station is to try to get the pilgrims to be able to go from Istanbul to Makkah and Medina by train as quickly as possible. Okay, so whereas the British were building the trains for moving slaves and commodities, Abdul Hamid built the train actually for the pilgrimage. So what you start to see, why is this important? What you see then in Islamic societies, and one of the points I'm trying to make to you is that when we're studying Islamic history, I want you to understand civilization. I want you to understand that when something goes into an Islamic civilization, it becomes Islamized, and then we use it differently. And so what happens is we take the train from the West, but we adapt it for different reasons. We take the print press from the West, but we adapt it for different reasons. We take the clock from the West, and we adapt it for our own needs, but there are still problems with it. And tech is very fascinating. I'll give you an example because as many people know, I used to be on social media. I'm not on it anymore because when it first came to me, I thought this is great. I can contact people around the world. I've got WhatsApp. I don't need text messages anymore. People can contact me anytime. Now I live in Turkey, they send me messages at 3 in the morning. And I wake up, I see the sound of 2 blue ticks, and now they want me to reply straight away. No, I don't need this headache. I'm talking to someone, and my phone is going crazy. And so there's a third person present while I'm talking to someone. Now, when I first had WhatsApp, I didn't realize that was going to be a problem. But now I see the problem with it. So that's the interesting thing about Muslim societies. You have to understand is when the tech goes into it, it's hard for the ulama to know what the problems of this tech is going to be. They make a decision, is it halal or is it haram? Technically. Then when it comes into societies, then you start to see the problems. And then you have another debate. Okay, how fruitful is this in our communities, in our societies, right? And that's something that we need to speak about all the time. So people often make the argumentation that why are Muslims so slow regarding tech? What happened to them? Well, this is what's happening. That when tech comes in, there has to be this vigorous debate of how beneficial is this tech when it comes in. All right, so Abdul Hamid, he improves the school system, he centralizes it, and he uses a concept called Ittihad Islam. He focuses on Muslim unity. He believes that if he focuses on Muslim unity as a concept, then that will protect the Ottoman domains ideologically from the outside. He's saying, yes, improve the tech, reform, but you have to. But if the Muslims emotionally are not bond together and they don't have a belief that they are one ummah, we're going to fall apart. And it's very easy to disunite people. One of the interesting things that we learned from this period is very easy to destroy, it's very hard to build. It's hard to create civilizations, it's easy to destroy them. It's hard to create tech, it's easy to destroy them. It's hard to create unity, it's easy to create fitna. Okay, and you have to understand that. This is why in Islam, we keep reminding you of unity, but it's very hard. You have to drop your ego, you have to drop how you feel, and you have to work very hard to keep the communities together. Even now, in this country, whenever I come back, one of the concerns I have is the community is just not tight enough. I'll give you an example. When Hagia Sophia happened, the critics were united in their criticisms. The Muslims were fighting amongst themselves. And for me, I found that surprising, because that sort of like disunity means that there's a lack of clarity in the community itself, because they don't know where the fault lines are of what they should be unified over. That discussion has to take place. Yeah.
During this time period, is the Western world applying pressure to them?
Yes, so the Western world is now applying extreme pressure on them. And this is one of the interesting things. People often make the argument that the Ottomans failed the Muslim world. Actually, that's unfair. What you could make the argument is the Muslim world failed the Ottomans in some ways, because they were already colonized. And so the Ottomans were the only entity left that was staying away from colonization. What makes the Ottomans unique is they were neither colonizers nor were they colonized. They were abolished. Okay, it's very different in that context. Okay, one of the ways we know that they were not colonizers is because when you look at Albanians, they don't speak Turkish. When you go to Algeria, they don't speak Turkish. You start to see this. In actuality, when you see Ottoman Turkish, which is what we read, there are more Arabic and Persian words in that language. And the language of colonization never works like that. The language of colonization puts its language in your language. It doesn't embrace the other way around. So Ottoman Turkish was very unique in that context, okay? In that sense. So Abdul Hamid is in power for 30 years, and he's pushing the idea of Ittihad Islam. Okay, I have 15 minutes, we can do this. Inshallah. Okay, I feel like a magician, I'm doing tricks. But one of the interesting things is that he's been in power for too long. Okay, power for too long. 30 years, 33 years in power is a long time. And what I forgot to tell you is that in 1876, we have a constitutional caliphate. A constitutional caliphate and a parliament. But there's a war in 1876, and in that war, there are too many decision makers in parliament. It's too slow. Abdul Hamid is not happy with this. He scraps the parliament. He says, I'm done with this. I'm the person in charge. One person in charge, we can fix the problem. Okay, so that's the advantage, right? Too many people saying this, that, the other. But here's the disadvantage. He's been in power for 33 years. Nobody can challenge his authority. So after 33 years, people complain, and we have a revolution. It's called the Constitutional Revolution. So in 1908, we have a constitutional revolution. We have a movement of military soldiers who decide that they want a constitution to hold Abdul Hamid to account. That while we accept that he is the pious sultan, but the person's been in power for too long. And we need a parliament, and we want it back because we want other people in the Ottoman domains to have a stake and a say in the political process. What they're asking for is for shura. They're institutionalizing the idea of shura in the hands of parliament. This is really important because when you see the works of Muhammad Iqbal, for example, in Pakistan, or Muhammad Asad, the thinker, all of their ideas about the shura and the institutionalization of parliament are coming from the Ottoman period. They're not coming from a vacuum, okay? Always remember that nothing comes from a vacuum. None of us are that intelligent that we've just created something. Even insan, Allah Ta'ala had to teach Adam alayhi salam the names of things before we can learn what to do, right? So nothing comes from us. Always remember that something's come from before you, and then we build on that. And so they remove Abdul Hamid from power. They don't kill him, and they send him into exile. A shift has taken place in Ottoman policy. Now the problem, what could be the problem of having a sultan away and there's another sultan around, is that sultan's influence, existing influence, can be problematic. I'll give you a crude example, Donald Trump. He's not happy that Obama and all of these presidents exist because they can undermine his authority. Whenever he says something, you have Carter, Bush, and Obama, they step forward, and Bill Clinton telling him that's not the way a president operates. It's problematic for him. So one of the things you start to realize in the idea is you can have a sultan in power, but if an existing sultan is still around, he can undermine your authority. So I'm trying to once again explain this political complexity for you, okay? I don't want to give you just yes, no's. I want you to understand in that context. But anyway, Abdul Hamid is removed and the revolution happens. And by 1911, they haven't even been able to institutionalize a constitutional parliament. War in Libya. The Italians invade Libya. And so the Ottomans don't even have time to adjust. And the Libyans have been invaded by the Italians. Now, this is important. Why? Because a lot of people look at Omar Mukhtar in particular as the sort of like resistance fighter against the Italians. But a lot of the guerrilla tactics were taught by the Ottomans. A lot of the weapons came from Istanbul. They gave it to them. They said, put them there. They said, okay, look, there were fights. So Mustafa Kemal was in Libya. Enver Pasha was in Libya. They were there. And this is the first time you start to see guerrilla tactics because the Ottomans are militia. They're military, they're an army, they know what to do. But why did the Ottomans leave Libya? Because in 1912, the Balkan Wars, and the Ottomans have to make a choice. Libya or the Balkans. And remember I told you before, the Balkans were so important for the Ottomans, it was their project. So they had to make a choice. So what they said to the Libyans is, we're going to leave these weapons for you, we're going to leave these know-how for you, and we're going to have to go up north, and you're just going to have to survive. And if you survive it, we'll come back. And if you don't, we're going to have to work this out. Okay, so understand what's happening so fast. Okay, the Balkan Wars ends with the Ottomans losing the Balkan Wars. And they lose huge territories in the Balkan period, up until Edirne. So for those of you that have been to Istanbul, Edirne is the next capital city of the Ottoman domains, and it's very close to Istanbul in that context. And that's how much of the Balkans they lost. Then in 1913, what happens is the Serbs go to war with the Bulgarians. The Ottomans see this as an opportunity. They go back and they take some land back. Now these wars are only 1 year long. Libya is 1 year. The first Balkan War is 1 year. The second Balkan War is 1 year. So the Ottomans say, okay, fine. What happens? World War I. 1914, the world is changing. The colonial powers are fighting each other. The Brits, the French, the Germans, and the Russians. They're competing over each other in regards to resources. And the Germans decide to invade Russia. Okay? So the enemy to the Russians were the Germans. Now, the Ottomans had to make a choice. Who are we going to side with? Do we side with the British? The British said, we don't want to get involved in the war. We can't side with the Russians because the Russians are our enemy. So we're stuck. So we're going to sign a treaty with the Germans. They signed a treaty with the Germans because the British and the French refuse in some ways of trying to help the Ottomans out. Now this is what's intriguing. The British do get involved in the war. And the way they get involved in the war is through the back door. The treaty is this. If the Russians are attacked, then the French will get involved. If the French are attacked, then the British will get involved. The French weren't attacked. The Russians were attacked. But because the French got involved in the war, the British got involved in the war to protect the French. So they came through that way. And the Ottomans had aligned themselves to the Germans, and then the Germans got involved in the war, and now you start to see the collapse of the Ottoman domains. What you start to see is a long, drawn-out war. Okay, the Ottomans never expected that, and they made many mistakes in the war effort. 1918 is an interesting year. The reason why 1918 is important because we have the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. They want communism. The Russians are out. But one of the interesting things the Russians do is they put out the documents of Sykes and Picot. They tell the Ottomans that the British and the French have designs for the Arab world, which nobody knew at the time. They were oblivious to this. They were oblivious to the fact that the British and the French wanted to do a smash and grab in the Arab world. They thought this was just a conflict, and if we lose, it'll be fine. So now what happens is the Ottomans become aware of this, but it's too late. Now there's resistance from the Arab provinces. Not all the Arabs were resisting, but some Arabs took it amongst themselves that we want to decentralize the domains. As I said to you before, they don't want independence, they want decentralization. They've been asking for decentralization for a long time because they're saying, we don't want Istanbul to make all the choices. And they were promised, however, by the British that if you go along with us, we will help you decentralize these domains, and you can get your sort of semi-autonomy. But the British didn't have these designs at all. What the British wanted also, they wanted to take it all. Okay, this is one of the ways that the British operate. So 1918 becomes a fault line year because the Arab provinces become independent from the Ottomans. The Arab provinces are now lost. And this is a huge shock to the Ottoman system, the loss of the Arab provinces. Actually, what's interesting is the Ottomans were more shocked at the loss of Baghdad than they were at the loss of Mecca and Medina, which surprises some people sometimes. But Baghdad was like the pivot for the entrance to Mecca and Medina. Lose Baghdad, strategically, you lose it all. And Baghdad was the city of the Abbasids. That was heavy in their mind because they knew that that's a loss of power. That's a loss of center of power. So in some ways, you can't get to Mecca and Medina if you can't get via Baghdad. So once the British took Baghdad, they knew we're in a mess. And then imagine your soldiers, for so long you're fighting, Mecca gone, Medina gone, Aqsa gone, Baghdad gone, Cairo gone. This is really hurting the resolve of the Ottoman armies, right? Really shocking their system. There was a locust infection, malaria. And so some Muslims started to believe that Allah was punishing them. You know, what's going on here? Like, are we being punished by Allah? So understand the war situation, what's going on. By 1920, okay, we now have to go to Turkey, mainland Turkey. Everything's been lost, okay? The only thing we have left now, sorry, 1918 is interesting also because of the British occupation of Istanbul. The British occupation of it. The British, I have 5 minutes. We're going to finish in 5 minutes, we'll be all right. All right. We have the British, the French, and the Greeks occupy Istanbul. And this Hagia Sophia question is important. Why? Because it comes to 1918, actually. A lot of people don't know that. When the British, the French, and the Greeks occupied Istanbul, they had designs that now we want Hagia Sophia back. It had been a mosque for 500 years. Nobody even thought about it. But 1918 was the fault line moment where the Greeks were now starting to create this imagination of a Greek authority. And they wanted parts of Turkey, like so Izmir, so forth, right? And they wanted Hagia Sophia. Now the Turkish armies, they fight back, they expel them, and they keep it. And so this agitation of Hagia Sophia has been going on since then in terms of the Greek mentality. Now, 1920, there's what we call an internal struggle in Turkey. Factions that want to maintain the caliphate and factions that want a Turkish republic. At the time, it's not said whether they want a Turkish republic or not. That's not declared openly. So we don't know of that. What we know is that there's an internal struggle with a group of soldiers in Ankara. So we have two governments. We have the Istanbul government and the Ankara government. We have two governments. The Istanbul government is compromised because of the occupation in 1913 by the British forces. So the idea is to move inland. You're inland, the British forces are not there. You're safe and you can make decisions from there. But what actually is happening is a contestation between these two governments. And this government is heavily compromised. Okay? And then we have the Treaty of Sèvres and then the Treaty of Lausanne that takes place to expel this. And this government is successful in doing so. Now this is important because in the Indo-Pak region at the same time, we're seeing the movement of the Khilafat Committee. Okay, this movement in the Indo-Pak region that we need to save the Ottomans. And they're sending money and they're sending people and so forth, save the Ottoman domains. So what you start to see is that the Ottomans had not only managed to mobilize soldiers inside, they had managed to mobilize contestation outside. Okay, what did they do? 1923, the Ankara government decides to abolish the Sultanate. Okay, so we don't want to touch the Caliphate, it's just the Sultanate we're not interested in. The Caliphate will stay, we can have an elected Caliph, no problem. 1924, one of the problems they have is that the Indian Muslims are harassing the Turks. What are you going to do about the Caliphate? What are you going to do about the Caliphate? And so the Turks decide that due to internal contestation and outside encroachment, we're going to abolish it. We're done with you. Leave us alone. We're going to start with a Turkish Republic. We're going to start with new, something fresh. We're done. Everybody out. Leave us alone. So then that's what happens. Okay? And so then slowly, when the Turkish Republic is formed, you start to see the Reformation process, and it's an aggressive Reformation process. Ottoman Turkish becomes Turkish. The madrasas get closed down. The ulama can no longer wear a hat. If you wear a hat, you go to prison or you get executed. Yeah, you have to shave your beards. You have to wear uniform in that sense. And one of the things I'll tell you is it's interesting. Clothing matters. So one of the ulama, he said that first we dress, then they take away the way we think. So when we wear clothing, it's a projection of who we are. And he was strongly in the belief that the clothing we wear represents who we are as Muslims. And so if you see some of the photos in those days, it's impossible to find a single person without a hat. Impossible. I've never seen a single photo with a person without a hat. For them, they died for the hat. It's unbelievable. So we talk about women taking off the hijab today. Actually, they attacked the men first, about 100 years ago, by forcing them to take off their clothing and change it in that sense. So a lot of these reforms took place. And then, as we said, Hagia Sophia was closed down as a symbol. Why? Because Hagia Sophia wasn't a mosque, it was the mosque of the Ottoman Empire, because it was where the caliph was inaugurated as the caliph. The bayah was given in Hagia Sophia. So in the Turkish mindset, you have to understand, the reason why I'm explaining this, is they didn't understand why people were upset, because for them, the contestation was internal. It was this internal conflict of what happened to them in the 1930s. For example, the azan was turned into Turkish, right? It was this internal contestation that they were fighting over. They didn't understand why Muslims were getting triggered all of a sudden in Europe because of these issues. Because for them, this is the history. This is what's going on in that context. 24, you have the Turkish Republic, and then everything changes. So that's it. Oh, that's it. Okay. So I'll go back to you. I'm really sorry that I had to give you like a crash course in this context. The idea is, or the hope is that I want to see more young Muslims studying their history, because we need intellectuals. When I was young, sorry, 10 minutes, I've got 10 minutes. Okay, then I can give you some advice for 10 minutes and I'll come to your question, okay? When I was studying my PhD, I'll tell you something interesting. I was told that who's going to pay you to think? Who's going to pay you to think? Because I wanted to do a PhD in Islamic history. Because we encourage our children to be doctors, nurses, engineers, and so forth. And yet what we lack in our communities are thinkers, people who can think on our behalf, people who can decide what's right and wrong on our behalf, people who have wisdom in our communities. It's too hard just to leave it on the shoulders of the imams. It's too much for them to do. We need people in our communities who are going to take responsibilities to be thinkers, to support the communities and support the imams in the changing world that exists right now. I'm not asking for independent, I'm asking us to work together. But what I want you to do is to invest in people to think, because Allah, He gave you aql, which distinguishes you from animals. You think. So why do we not have thinkers? Western societies have thinkers. We lack thinkers. Turn on any television, the types of Muslims that come on TV that represent not representing your interests, because we lack those thinkers in our communities. So I'm emphasizing that when I started studying history, in Western society, the humanities is designed to create thinkers. That's what it's designed to do. The humanities in Oxford, Cambridge, create thinkers. These people are historians. They think about the past. But I saw very few Muslims. Yes, I know it's expensive. We need to find ways of pulling money together to create thinkers in our community who could find ways of providing solutions, not only for us, but for their future. That's one, okay? So that's why I really want to emphasize this. I'm a very quiet person who minds my own business. It's rich coming from me because I haven't come out and said, and doing the same. But I live in Turkey right now. But I see the benefits of living with students all the time and getting them to think. We have to encourage our students to think, and we have to make our Muslim youth feel confident of being Muslim. Don't be embarrassed about being Muslim. If I have 10 minutes, one of the things that I always teach my students is their shahada. They need to understand it, and they need to understand it properly. If you say ashhadu, the word shahada, Arabic is really beautiful because it's very precise in the way that the language operates. So shahada is a shahid. So if I'm a shahid at a wedding, when like Shaykh Suliman's asking me, you're shahid to this man marrying this woman, what's he asking me? He's not asking me, what did I see? He's asking me, what do I know? Right? You're a person of knowledge. You have knowledge of this person. Is he a good man? Yes, I'm a shahid. I'm a witness to this man. So when you're saying ashhadu, what are you saying? You're not saying, what are you looking at? Nothing. You're testifying that you have knowledge of something. Well, what do you have knowledge of? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. You have knowledge that there is nothing but Allah. And you start with what? La, no, a negation. And no is, there's no ambiguity with no. No is certain. Do you want tea? No. Are you happy? No. Would you like to go on holiday? No. It's certain. There's no uncertainty here. So the first thing you start off, you're testifying with knowledge, with certainty. And our young kids, I feel, are uncertain. There's a confusion. Why are they confused when the Shahada is telling them they must be certain? Certain of what? Of Allah Ta'ala's superiority. Of everything. Then what? What? And Ashhadu, second testament. Anna, doubling down. Muhammadin Abduhu. Rasul Sallam is Abduhu. If he is Abduhu, then what are we? We are also Abduhu, right? But what does that mean? Abdullah means you are a person to do ibadah. You're being put on this dunya to do ibadah. Then do ibadah. That's where it comes from, right? So your testimony is to do ibadah. And how do you do it? Wa Rasuluh. In the way that he brought it. And so the Shahada is with such conviction that I want young students, when they're studying Islam in the past, to do it with testimony, that they're certain, that they know what they're doing. Okay, that there's a reason behind why they're studying. And this is why I'm trying to encourage you all. I'm not going to be here in this country, but I want to support you as much as I can. But I want you to create curricula and think of ways where we can make Islamic history relevant, because even the seerah is not taught well. So this is what I want from those of you. So I know I have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to open up the Q&A. Go on. Yes.
Ahmed, what were the ambitions of the Sharif of Makkah and the House of Saud?
Okay. Sure. So the question was, what are the ambitions of the Sharif of Makkah and the House of Saud? So the Sharif of Makkah was basically, they were under the tutelage of the Ottomans, and the Ottomans often would support them, and in return they would support them back, right? But as World War I happens, the Sharif of Makkah himself starts to initially wants decentralization of the Ottoman domains. And then when he realized there's an opportunity where the Ottoman Caliphate has collapsed, there was a hope that maybe the Sharif of Makkah could become Caliph, and that his children could be in charge of the other parts of the Arab domains like Iraq, Syria, and so forth. And then what happens is the House of Saud rebels against that. Because they basically are not content with Sharif Hussein as being a competent leader in charge. And then there's a contestation between these two houses. And what's intriguing is the British provide weapons to both to see which side would win. And then the House of Saud had won, and Sharif Hussein had majorly lost out. And then the British take Iraq, and then the French take Syria, and then the British take Egypt, and then basically everything's been lost. And so then they're given Jordan as a piecemeal to keep them side by side. Yes, bro.
Can you recommend a book which would provide reading?
Yeah, this is the number one question I often get, which is, can we recommend a book? And unfortunately, we don't have these primers which I can recommend, because one of the things I didn't tell you is that history is ideology. Okay, whenever you read in a history book, it's always from someone's perspective. And so one of the things I'm trying to teach you guys or young people when I'm teaching them is, how do we read source information where we can extract what is relevant and what is not relevant. That requires discussion and debate. So one of the ways that we teach Islam, which is different from the Western way, is that in Islam, books were written to study, right? The alim writes a book, you sit with the alim, and he teaches backwards and forwards. That's the way the books are designed. It requires a teacher. The teacher is the institution. Western books is done via print capitalism. What that means is that we write a book it's sufficient information in the book. It doesn't require the teacher. But the problem with that is that often you can read the book and assume that that's truth, and there's no debate involved. So one of the things I'm trying to always encourage is, I can write down a list of books for you, no problem, but I still want the vibrant discussions in the community. Why is this right? Why is this not right? So the talk I gave today, I would like to see lots of things like this, which are vibrant in the community, lots of talks on Islamic history and so forth, so that we can, like you having these questions, and I can answer them, and many of us can answer them and have this debate to create it vibrant in the community. You know, what Rasul Sallam did with the Sahaba is amazing. He invested in them as people. So you can create institutions, you can create businesses, you can spend money on science, but you must invest in people. When he invested in the Sahaba, whether they had money or no money, they ran with it. Invest in your people, invest in your community, invest in the kids. And I think that's the way. So we want to create that community. But I can write a list for you, no problem. So with Saqib, I can give you a bibliography, and then we can work from there, okay? But I just want to add that. Yes, bro.
Two quick questions.
Sure, bro.
First is, you explained in the last, probably the last half of the Ottoman Empire, starting in 1400s. How would the Ottomans controlled all the three holiest places? How was the, I know the majority of the Ottoman Empire was non-Turks. How did the Arabs actually embrace? Did they embrace it? Did they really take them wholeheartedly? Have you spoken to Arabs about their history? Did they prefer it, or was there a lot of friction between them and the Turks? And secondly, the height of the Ottoman Empire and the Mughals, how did they Was there a cooperation in point? Did they fall away both ends?
Okay, sure. So the first part of the question was in regards to the holy places, Makkah, Medina, and Aqsa. Not only that, actually Najaf and Karbala were also under the Ottoman domain, which people forget, and so forth. Which is, how did the Arabs respond? Was it positive or negative regarding this being in the hands? Usually, these cities were in the hands of the Muslims locally. The Ottomans were the central power, as I said, but it was still locally administered. But by and large, there wasn't a problem. Now, when the nation state is created, the nation state had to make the Ottoman past look negative as a way of legitimizing the current nation state. Because to create a new nation state, you have to complain about occupation that came before, right? Now, why is that happening in India and Pakistan with the British occupation? In the Ottoman domains, that wasn't the case. So when the new nation states were formed, they created very negative perceptions of the Ottomans in the curricula, which is still very common, which is a mistake. And Arab academics, unfortunately, are not working as hard as Turkish academics when it comes to Ottoman history because they want to forget that. I think that's a shame because I'm an independent. In that sense, I don't have any need, but I've seen that in the Arab world, they need to understand the Ottoman past better because the Ottomans did many wonderful things and usually it was locally administered. The second one, the Mughals and so forth. I mean, the Mughals were very far away to some degree, and then you had the Safavid dynasty in between. So there was no real problem. It is true that some Mughal sultans rejected the Ottomans as the caliphs because they were in charge, but it doesn't really matter because the Ottomans control most of the domains. So in that sense, it wasn't the case.
Jazakallah khairan. Okay, we'll take your last comment and then we'll end the program.
In your opinion, to what degree does the fall of the Ottoman Empire actually reverberate in our modern world? And also, by extension, how relevant is it really when trying to understand our own lives?
Sure. So the question was that first point was how does it reverberate in terms of what's happening in the world right now? And second one, is it relevant? Okay, that's a fantastic question. The first one is it still does reverberate to some degree. You can see the contestation in that part of the world already being contested over the Ottoman past. We can see with the UAE, Egypt, Syria, and so forth. Your identity doesn't begin with the creation of the nation state. Your identity goes before that. I'll give you an example. People of Haifa used to be a lot closer to people of Damascus rather than people of Jerusalem. They never subscribed to being Palestinian. They were people of Bilad Sham. That's an important idea to understand in terms of your memory. Now, I think it's correct to say that since then a lot has happened. Wars, conflicts, invasions, and so forth. So to some degree, the overemphasis on the Ottomans can be a little bit problematic if we don't also learn what's happening since the Ottomans. So that's the first part. But the Ottomans should be learned just like any other history in that sense, to understand how these regions were, how peoples were living together. Because when I live in those regions, yes, it's changed, but it hasn't changed. Some of those memories, emotions are still there. So Istanbul, for example, is an Ottoman city. You can't deny that when you see the mosques everywhere. And that's what's kept Islam in that city, right? Now, why is it relevant? It's relevant for this reason, because this history hasn't gone away. When you take the history away from people, you take their memories away from people. When you take their memories away from them, they have no recollection of the past. When you have no recollection of the past, you become very narrow as a human being. You're only trying to survive today. And one of the things that I believe is that our memories have been colonized and we have no imagination of the future. When we speak to young people today, how do you imagine the future? They'll say flying cars, this, that, the other. Who gave you those ideas? They talk about what they imagine themselves as Muslims in the future. They don't have this imagination. The only way you can draw that imagination is to go into the past and see what people did. Okay, and this is very relevant in terms of it's quite close still. But I'm not just saying emphasize on this. I want you to learn all of history actually, so that we can make it relevant. It's my job as a historian, and that's a fantastic question, to try to make it relevant for you actually. So as a student, you should continuously be asking people like us, why is this relevant, so that we can make it relevant to you. But history is always relevant.
You know, I just want to say Jazakallah khairan, mashallah. I know this is the first, I would say, inshallah, we hope Bilal Foundation will arrange more Islamic causes, Islamic history. And Islamic history is not just, today was just true as we heard from Yakoob Ahmed, just to give us lots of information to know, let us at least know how little we know about Islamic history. And as Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. There is for you in their stories ibrah and lessons for those who have intellect. So without Islamic history, I think really today we've understood how lost we are. What an amazing heritage. In total, what was the number of years, Ottoman period?
600.
600.
Yeah.
600 years and continuity.
Yeah.
No gaps in between.
No.
No mind the gap. It was continuous. Therefore, when you go to places like Bosnia, Herzegovina, which we visited, and we went to Uzbekistan, many of those places, especially Bosnia, Herzegovina, and the Mostar, and even those who visited Masjid al-Aqsa, all this great legacy that we see, even in Haramain, even all what happened to the Hijaz Railway, all this thing was during the Ottoman period of time. So really speaking, about 40 countries, they have left a great legacy. And that is why when we visited Sarajevo, when we visited Sindo's Masajid, you will actually feel you're walking in the streets of Istanbul. You will actually feel when you're in Istanbul that you're walking in Jerusalem. There's the amazing great legacy that you see, the tall minarets. And here we are today, our topic of the decline of the Ottoman period. To conclude, what hope can you give us? Because some say there is a great revival in Istanbul. What do you feel for the Ummah to conclude?
In terms of revival, I don't know. We're part of the Ummah, so we are sensing something. But I think we are responsible of laying foundations in the hope, of having hope. I think as Muslims, we have to hope that we exist, Islam exists, Islam is bigger than us, and Islam is going to survive, whether you like it or not. So, look, people say to me, Yakoob, people are leaving Islam and so forth. The izzah of Islam doesn't diminish because all of us leave. It's our izzah that diminishes. Islam is still going to be here. And if Islam is still going to be here, it means Muslims are still going to be here. That means the deen of Allah Ta'ala is still going to be here. So in that sense, we must have hope that in the future, just like in the past, where we've had empires that have come, empires that fall. Sultans have risen, sultans have fallen. But Islam has always been there. It's still here. So we can still keep working for Allah Ta'ala. And in the future, inshallah, it will be better for us than it is now. We have to have that hope.
So yes, indeed. And with that, we will conclude just to give us that reminder that as long as you are Muslims, وَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that Allah have kept the izzah for the believers, وَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ, and for all of the believers. So even though what we're witnessing happening there, the Uyghur Muslim in Xinjiang, and we see here we are speaking about the decline of the Ottoman period, but remember 600 years and how much our children are learning about this period of time, whether it's in a madrasa, whether in a school. So here we have Yakoob Ahmed, PhD in Islamic history. How many of us have really understood and know of those who have specialized in this type of topics, which is really, really beneficial for us. It gives us a feeling that indeed we should not despair from the mercy of Allah. And we pray and make Allah Ta'ala make this a possibility that in the future, when Yakoob Ahmed visits us, or when you visit Istanbul, can we visit you in Istanbul University?
Sure. Yeah.
So we will register for the course there, and then we'll all go and take a full lesson on Islamic history, and that will be sponsored by Bilal Foundation. Is that correct? Yes, come. Bilal, come. Well, Bilal, obviously, I just wanted to remind you that his father passed away during the COVID-19 when it was really at its peak. And Bilal Patel, we knew him for many, many years, and he served the community, and he was many had passed away, and he used to take care of the burial. How many times I accompanied there, and I think it was 6th of April, the day that came that we had to go to Eternal Garden and bury his father. We pray, may Allah Ta'ala grant him high status in Jannah. We pray and make Allah Ta'ala make this work now. He has inspired his son, even though he didn't see him in his lifetime doing this type of work. We hope that, as we say, when the son of Adam dies, 3 things benefit the person in a grave: sadaqatun jariyah, ilmun yuntafa' bihi, or waladun salihun yad'u lah. Waladun salih, a pious son who will make dua for him, inshallah. So we hope and pray that you remain pious. Ameen. So give us some concluding words here.
This bayan was basically a sadaqah jariyah for my father, ongoing knowledge. This was the plan basically, but me, Yakoob, and a group of us brothers are getting together to possibly create a course for the community and for the madrasas, whoever's willing to actually learn and invest, as Dr. Yakoob has said, in knowledge, in this specific field of knowledge. It's imperative that we learn, because if you look at the Black community, if you look at the African community, they are changing their narrative. They are not accepting what they are being taught. There is a conscious effort to redefine history. And this is not so much so in the Muslim community. And it's a sad state that we're happy to earn money, go home, live, and do what we need to do without considering the greater, consequences of our ignorance. So we, inshallah, with the Khalil Institute, Bilal Foundation, Dr. Yakoob Ahmed, we are gonna come together to create a course. Inshallah, if you guys can give us feedback about what you felt about this talk, it will really help us in designing the course. If the African communities are coming together and opening Saturday school, which they call Pan-African schools, then we should open or have some facilities of Pan-Islamism schools. Pan-Islamism is not synonymous with terrorism. You hear all these labels being thrown around, but learning about your religion doesn't make you a terrorist or doesn't make you anything of that sort. Knowing your history will enlighten you and allow you to hold conversations with the relevant people. So inshallah, I hope you take on board what's been said and give us some feedback. There are a few courses coming on. Let Shaykh Suliman know, inshallah.
So, yeah, Jazakallah khairan. And finally, to conclude, that we are grateful that here at the Pali Masjid, as we have this is our first event since the long absence of the masjid. And I see some old faces have come back because of the barakah of this event. So don't forget, we see our sisters, they are struggling, sitting there in the back. They need one floor for themselves. Is that correct, brother? So inshallah, on your way out, do take the leaflet. And inshallah, in the future, we hope that Allah Ta'ala make it possible that this Pali Masjid will be built from the foundation. And with your support and your du'as and prayers, we just hope and pray Allah make it a possibility that can be got brother Yakoob Ahmed in Istanbul, and he's going to send us a special architect to have a special minar. I'm joking. Like Sinan Minar, we want to build a small blue mosque here in Pali. Can you help us? Inshallah. May Allah reward you all abundantly. Inshallah, after the Sabbath, going to call out the Azan. And when you call out Azan, you're going to feel that you're in Ayah Sophia, mashallah.